Thoughts on the readings for February 2nd: Exodus 7, 8, Psalms 60, 61, Romans 12. Exodus 7 verses 1-13 describe Moses and Aaron's next encounter with Pharaoh, who was the embodiment of supremacy over all Egypt's gods. The Almighty had told his representatives that Pharaoh would mightily resist until God's signs and wonders had been multiplied in Egypt, and Yahweh shown to be superior and incomparable in all the earth. The demand for proof of the authority of Yahweh's envoys was made, and the sign of the supreme serpent-devouring staff was demolished. The magicians, Jans and Jambres, were put to shame. 2 Timothy 3 verses 8-9. The first plague followed with the lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile River, being made death to the Egyptians. Chapter 8 tells of the second plague quickly following. Pharaoh asked his magicians to replicate the plague, which they endeavored deceitfully to do. Eventually Pharaoh seems to relent, and when asked of Moses to name the timing of the frog's departure from his land, he said, "Make it tomorrow." As soon as Pharaoh was granted respite from the frogs, he hardened his heart. The record tells us that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and it also tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Both are true, for God had raised up a stubborn, resistant man to rule over Egypt at this time in order that Yahweh's might and magnificence might be evident. Romans 9 verses 16-18. Next followed the third plague of swarming gnats, whose annoyance was vast. The magicians failed to copy this miraculous sign, and they acknowledged before Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." From now on, says Moses to Pharaoh, Yahweh's people will not feel the effects of the plague, in order that you may know the one who is bringing these plagues, and he is telling you to yield and let his people go. The fourth plague of blood-sucking flies came next, and as promised, Israel were exempted from this plague. Pharaoh momentarily relents, and says that only the adult males can sacrifice in the nearby wilderness. Moses warned Pharaoh to cease with his deceitful cheating, and if he did, Moses would beseech his God to remove the flies. But once more Pharaoh lied and turned away from the agreement once he had respite. Psalm 60 is another victim of David. David deserved to die for his adultery with Bathsheba and his murder of Uriah, from the commands to Joab. Joab had previously smitten Rabbah, the Ammonite capital. These events meant that David had effectively ceased to be king. Joab effectively usurped the kingly authority, and had become the de facto ruler. God's wrath had been upon Israel and its king, who was defiantly acting selfishly. Israel in battle had been at the precipice of defeat. This psalm was written primarily to commemorate Joab's victory over the Edomites. Petra, the Edomite capital, appeared impregnable. The Lord had stood by his people and eventually granted victory to his people over their foes, as this psalm proclaims. Psalm 61 is a plea from David to find support and stability for his turning to his God, as the only dependable constant in a troubled and vexatious life. It had all been David's fault, yet his sovereign had not forgotten, nor forsaken, him. God had proven himself to be David's fortress and consolation. David says that he has learned a reverence for Yahweh and would promote this attitude in all the faithful. Those learning these lessons would become the citizens of Jerusalem in the kingdom age. Psalm 15. Chapters 1-8 of Romans develop the gospel of God. 9-11 explain the gospel and Israel. Now from chapter 12 through to 16 we are shown how to live the gospel in our daily life. Chapter 12 begins the practical advice with the acknowledgement that daily service and living a sacrificial life is both rational and reasonable. In verse 2-8, Christ's servants must understand how to contribute to ecclesial life in humility and with eagerness and zeal, participating for the building up of a glorious bride. Each of us is exhorted to know our role in God's ecclesial house and to exercise it. Verses 9-20 identify qualities of the transformed way of living for all true disciples. What sound advice concludes the chapter on avoiding vengeance and living peacefully with others? The final words of the chapter should be one of our mottos for daily life. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil by good. Penned by Warwick Rosser and his team, produced by christadelphianvideo.org.